This video is sponsored by DevMountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, DevMountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to create a RESTful API with Node.js. And instead of using Express, we're going to use something called Restify, which is pretty similar. It's kind of a slimmed down version. It's just for RESTful APIs. It's not for building other types of applications like you can do with Express. And we're also going to be using MongoDB for our database. We're going to use Mongoose as an ORM that sits on top of our database so we can easily fetch and add things to the database and so on. We're also going to be implementing token-based authentication in the next video. So my goal for this video is to get up and running just a CRUD, basic CRUD API, create, read, update, and delete. We're going to use customers as a resource. And then in the next video, we're going to implement authentication so that we can actually log in and, through Postman or through any HTTP client that you want to use. And then you'll get a token back and you'll be able to access protected routes with that JWT token. Okay, so it's going to be pretty in-depth if you compare it to a lot of other REST API tutorials, including some of my own. A lot of them don't do that. They don't show you how to actually authenticate and stuff like that. It's just wide open. So yeah, we're gonna get into it. Hopefully I can do it in 2 videos. We'll do the basic CRUD API now, and then in the next video we'll do the authentication. If it takes too long, then it might be split up into a few videos. All right, now as far as Restify, I mean, it's just one of many options. Express is very popular. I've used it over and over. I use it in all my courses. I wanted to use something different. So you have Restify, you have Koa, which is a great framework, very similar to Express. They're all pretty similar. Loopback is another one. You have, what else? Happy.js. So you have a lot to choose from. And some people will bash some others just because that's not what they use, but they're all very similar. They're all pretty similar in performance. Some are a little easier to work with than others, but I really like Restify. I used it in a project a while ago, one of my side projects, so I just wanted to do something different. And if you want to use Express, that's fine. I mean, the syntax is just a little bit different. All the Mongoose stuff, that's all going to be the same. We're going to use modern syntax, so we're going to use like async await and stuff like that. So it's going to be very modern code. All right, so let's get started here. I just have the Restify website open here if you want to look at the docs. So it's pretty simple. You just include Restify, create a server, and then you can create your endpoints. You want to listen on a port, so very similar to how Express works. Okay, of course, we're using Mongoose. With Mongoose, we have to create database models. So we'll have a customer model, and then when we implement authentication, we're going to have a user model. And then we're going to use MLab for our MongoDB deployment rather than install it locally, which I would highly recommend. I use MLab in development and in production. All right, so let's jump into VS Code and get started. So we have a clean slate here, just an empty folder called Restify_customer_API. You can call your folder whatever you want, obviously. I'm going to be using the integrated terminal in VS Code. So I'm going to run npm init -y, so I don't have to answer any questions, and that's going to generate a package.json file. Okay, so package.json holds all your dependencies, your npm scripts, all your other stuff like the name and version. I know a lot of you guys know this, but just for those of you that don't. So we want to install a few things here. I'm not going to install everything we need. I'm not going to install anything that has to do with JWT, the token-based authentication or anything. Like I said, I just want to get like just a basic CRUD API up and running. So first thing we want to do, let's install Restify. Okay, we also want something called Restify-errors, which will allow us to handle errors more elegantly. And then we want Mongoose to deal with our MongoDB database. And then I want to use something called Mongoose-timestamp, which is going to add a created at and an updated at field to all of our documents or all of our records. So let's go ahead and run that. And those should all get installed as dependencies. So we should see those pop up here. Okay, so good. And next thing I want to do is install NodeMon as a dev dependency. So I'm going to say npm install -d NodeMon, and that will just constantly watch our server so we don't have to keep restarting it when we make changes. And that should get added as a dev dependency. Okay, good. So next thing I want to do is add a couple scripts. So first of all, we want to start script. So this will basically run in deployment. We're probably going to deploy to Heroku, or maybe DigitalOcean, I'm not sure. Or maybe not at all, depends. So here we're going to say node index.js. That's what I'm going to call the file. And then let's go ahead and create another script that will be nodemon index.js, and we're going to call this dev. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save that file and close it up. And we want to create two more files in the root. One is index.js, one is config.js. And of course, you can create them from here if you want. So config is basically just going to be an object with some environment variables that we'll use throughout this application. So I'm going to module.exports an object. We'll have our environment. Now I'm going to use these process.env dot, and then actually this will be our node environment. Okay, so this will be used in production, or in development we would just want it to be development. So that's our environment. Next we're going to put our port number. So we'll say process.env.port, or, and then whatever number you want to use in development. I'm going to use 3000. Yeah, 3000. Okay, next thing is going to be just our base URL. So I'm going to say process.env.base_URL, or our URL in development is going to be HTTP localhost and port 3000. And then the last thing I'm going to do for now is our MongoDB URI, basically our connection string. So URI. And for that, we're going to do process.env.MongoDB URI, or, and then we need to put our connection string. So we need to actually create a database. So let's head over to MLab, and this is really easy. If you don't have an account, just go ahead and sign up. It's free. You get quite a bit of space for free for just development. No credit card needed. So once you sign in or log in, you'll see this screen here. So you just want to create new, and we're going to choose Amazon Web Services for our cloud provider. Continue. I'm going to choose US East. Continue, and then give it a name. I'll just say customer API, and continue, submit, and should create it pretty quickly. Okay, so once it's a green check, we can go ahead and click on it. Now you do need to create a database user, so I'm going to go to users and add database user, and I'm just going to use ABC123 exclamation, and I'm going to use that for my username and my password. Okay, so now that we've done that, you can see up here we have a connection string right here. This is our URI. We want to grab this, and we want to put that right in here. Okay, just make sure you change your DB user to whatever your user is. And you also want to change the password. So get rid of this and put in your password. I use the same thing. Okay, and that's it for now. Later on, we're going to put our JWT secret in here as well, but we're not dealing with that just yet. So that's good for the config. Let's open up our index. And from here, we want to bring in a couple things. Of course, Restify. So we want to say require Restify. And we want to bring in Mongoose as well. Okay, we want to bring in our config file that we just created, so /config. All right, so let's initialize Restify. I'm going to call this server. You can call this app or whatever you want. Common convention with Restify is to use server. And we're going to just call Restify.createServer. Okay. Next thing we want to do is middleware, and the documentation lists all the middleware. The only thing that I believe we need is the body parser. So we're going to say server.use, just like Express, you do, usually app.use. And the middleware is in the context of plugins. So we actually want to say restify.plugins and then body parser. Okay, make sure you put those parentheses on the end. After that, we're going to take our server object and we're going to call listen. We want to put our port here. So in our config file, we want the port value. And then we want to put an arrow function here. Once the server is listening, that's when we want to connect to MongoDB through Mongoose. So we're going to say mongoose.connect. That's going to take in the connection, the MongoDB URI, which is also in our config file. So config MongoDB URI. One other thing we want to add here is an object with the value of use new URL parser and set that to true. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting this annoying warning. So make sure you put that in. All right, so I'm going to save that. I have Prettier installed with VS Code, and I have it to format on save, so you can see it just kind of changed it up a little bit, made it a little more readable. Next thing we're going to do is initialize our DB variable, set that to mongoose.connection. Okay, and then we want to handle any MongoDB errors. We can do that by saying db.on error. Then all I want to do is take the error and console log it. All right. Okay, next thing we want to do is handle the opening of the database. So we'll say db once, because this is only going to happen once, and then open. And when the database opens, this is where we basically want to create all of our routes. Okay, now we're not going to list all of our routes in this file. We're going to have separate routing files for each resource. So we'll have a customers file for customer routes. When we do the authentication later on, we'll have a users file. So right now, I just want to require, /routes. We're going to create a folder called routes, and then we're going to have a file called customers, and that's going to export a function. Now I want to pass in the server instance. Okay, so I want to pass this in because that's what we're going to use to actually create routes. So server.get, server.post, and so on. All right, and then lastly, I'm just going to console log here, and I'll use backticks, and I'll say server started on port, and we'll put in config.port. All right, so now we want to create our routes folder. So routes, and inside routes, we're going to have a file called customers.js. This is going to have any routes that have to do with our customers. So basically all of our CRUD stuff. Now you can see we passed in server here. So we actually want this to export a function. So I'm going to go to customers.js, and we're going to module.exports, and you could do function and pass in server like that if you want. I'm actually going to use, I'm going to use an arrow function. So I'm going to get rid of this and just say server like that. All right, now up here, I just want to bring in that Restify errors because that'll allow us to handle errors more elegantly. So I'm going to say const errors equals require, and we want to pass in Restify -errors. Okay, so in here's where we want to make our, we want to create our routes or handle our routes. So let's create an endpoint here. We'll say server.get. Okay, so we're going to handle a GET request to /customers, and it's going to take in a function. Okay, now this function takes in three things. So request, response, and next. Now with Restify, whenever you're done with your route, you have to call next at the end. Okay, so don't forget to do that. Now as far as what I want to happen now, I just want to do a res.send, and we'll just send an object here. We'll say message with a string of test, just to test it out, make sure it works. So I'm going to save this, and let's clear this up down here and do npm run dev. Okay, so you can see server started. Now if you're getting an error that says something like something about the lib/CLI or something like that, what you want to do is just go ahead and delete your node modules folder. So you can just do rm-rf node_modules. I'll actually just do it, and then just do npm install or npm I. I don't know why that error happens sometimes, but it does. All right, so that'll just install everything that's in your package.json. Okay, so now I'm going to run the server again, npm run dev. All right, now what I'm going to do is test this route out. Now you can use any tool you want. If you want to use curl or some other HTTP client, I'm going to use Postman. You can just Google Postman and download it. It used to be a Chrome extension. Now it's a standalone tool, and it's just awesome. So we're going to make a GET request. So I'm going to keep this at GET to HTTP, and there it is right there, localhost 3000/customers. I'm going to send, and there it is. We get back a 200 response, which means everything's okay, and then we get an object with message test. I know this is really small. Let me actually make this bigger for you guys so you can actually see what's going on. Now, next thing we want to do is we want to start to deal with our customers. So with Mongoose, we have to create models. Okay, we have to create a schema for customers in order to deal with them. So I'm going to create a folder in the root directory called models, and inside models, we're going to create a file called uppercase C customer.js. Okay, so this is going to be our model. So first thing we want to do is bring in Mongoose. So we want to require Mongoose, and let's also bring in the timestamps module. So it's mongoose -timestamp, and I'm just going to call this timestamp. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is create a customer schema. So we want to set that to new mongoose.schema, and pass in here an object, and these are going to be the fields that we want. So we want a name, and we want to give it a type. It's going to be a string. It's going to be required, so we want to say required true, and I'm going to set trim to true as well, so that it trims off any white space. Underneath that, we're going to have an email, so I'm going to just copy this name, paste that in, and let's change this to email, which is also a string, also required, also trim, and then let's do a balance. Okay, so balance, the type is going to be a number, and I'm going to set the default to 0. Okay, so if a balance isn't included, then the default will be 0. So to use timestamps, all we have to do is take our customer schema and call .plugin, okay, because it's a Mongoose plugin, and just pass in timestamps, or timestamp, sorry. And that will add a created at and updated at automatically. Okay, so now what we want to do is create customer, and we want to set that to a new Mongoose model. Okay, so model called customer, and we want to pass in our customer schema to attach it to that model, and then we just want to export it. So module.exports equals customer, and that's it. That's our model. Okay, so now we can close that up and go back to our routes file, and now we want to bring in that customer model. So customer equals, say, require, and we want to require //models/customer. Okay, now remember this here, this route, this server.get customers, we want to just fetch all the customers that are in the database. So I'm going to get rid of this, and what we're going to do is we want to call customer.find. Now with Mongoose, we could say customer. I'm just going to show you. Could say customer.find. And we pass in an empty object because there's no parameters. We just want all of them. And then we could do a callback like this, where we do like error docs. Whoops, not Cox. We don't want Cox, at least I don't. And then error docs. We could do it like that. We could also use promises, which we are, but we could use the standard .then syntax, then catch. I'm actually going to use a sync await. So I'm going to just create a variable here called customers, and I'm going to set this to await customer.find. Now in order to use await, it has to be inside of a function that's asynchronous. So this callback function here I'm going to mark as async so that we can use await. Okay, and it's just going to basically await for the customers to come back, because this happens asynchronously, and then it'll put it in this variable. Okay, once that happens, we want to send it, so we'll do res.send, and we just want to send customers. Okay, and then we want to call next. Now, in order to do error handling, since we're not using the standard then catch, we need to wrap this in a try catch block. Okay, so we're going to do try. All right, and then we'll go ahead and just grab all this, and let's move this up. Whoops, move this up here. Some fancy keyboard shortcuts. Catch. Okay, so catch error. So if something goes wrong here, this is where these errors come in, Restify errors. So I just want to quickly show you. Restify errors. Okay, so this is is this it? Yeah. Now these are all the different errors that are available. Obviously these are all just like HTTP errors. So we have unauthorized error, forbidden, not found, all this stuff. And we just want to pass it in the next. Where is it? So we want to do it like this: return next new, and then errors dot whatever type of error we want. So for instance, bad request error. For this particular error, I'm going to use the invalid content error. So in here, let's go ahead and say return next, and we'll say new errors dot, and I'm going to use invalid. Let's see, invalid content error, and just pass in whatever is here. All right, and that should do it. Now we don't have anything in the database, but it should still give us just an empty array. So let's save this and let's try it out in Postman. So same route / customers, let's send, and we get an empty array, which is exactly what we should get, and we still get a 200 response, which means everything's okay. So now that we can fetch customers, let's actually add some. So we need to create a route for that. Let me just put a comment here saying this is to get customers. All right, and then under here, let's do add customer. Okay, so for this, we want to take our server object and we want to call post, because we're making a post request. And it's still going to be to / customers. It can be the same endpoint as long as it's a different method. All right, so I'm going to use a sync await here again. So I want to mark this as a sync, and we want request res next. All right. So when we make a post request, we want to make sure that the content type is of application / JSON. So let's do a check for that first. So we'll say check for JSON. So I'll say if, and we have access to that request object. We want to say if request dot is application slash JSON. Okay, I actually want to check if it's not, so we want to put an exclamation. So if it's not, then let's use our Restify errors. We're going to say return next, and in here we'll say new errors, and we're going to use invalid, where is it? Invalid content error, and I'm going to pass in, actually let's do double quotes here, and we're going to say expects single quote application slash JSON. All right, so if they try to send something that's not that of that content type, they're going to get this error. Okay, so let's move on, and we want to remember we're adding a customer, so we're going to create a variable called customer, and we're going to set it to a new customer. Hold on. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I thought I put user up here. But yeah, we're bringing in the customer model, so we want to say new customer. And in here we want to pass in an object, and this is where we want to put the fields. So name, and the way that we access the data that's sent from in our case Postman or whatever your front end is, you know, if you connected React or Angular or something like that, we would get that with request.body.name. What I'm going to do though is use a little bit of destructuring up here to create separate variables. So I'm going to say const, wrap this in curly braces. We want the name, the email, and the balance. Okay, and we're going to take that out of request.body. And then down here we can do like name, email, but with ES6, since these are both the same, we don't even need to do that. We can just simply do name, comma, email, and then balance. All right, so that'll create a new customer object here. Now what we need to do is save it to the database, because this isn't going to save it, it just creates it. So down here is where I'm going to do my try catch. Let's do error. So we'll say try catch, and we want to say new customer equals await, and this is where we call customer.save. Okay, and if you weren't using async await, you could do customer.save.then and so on, or you could use a callback. And then the response we want to send is just a 201. A 201 means everything is okay, but something was created. Okay, so it means created. And then of course we need to call next. All right, now if something goes wrong here, I'm going to call an internal error. So I'm going to say return next, and let's say new errors dot internal error, and then this error should have a message, so I'm going to say error dot message. All right, so yeah, that should work. So let's save this and let's see if we can actually add a customer. So I'm going to go back to Postman. I'm going to open a new tab here, choose post. Okay, we want to make it to same URL, 3000/customers. Now, since it's a post request and it has to be JSON, we have to go to headers and add a content type. Okay, now the content type should be, like we said, application/JSON. All right, and then in the body, I'm going to choose raw, and I'm going to pass in some JSON. Okay, so you want to use your double quotes here, and we'll say name. Let's say John Doe, email, john@gmail, and balance. Actually, let's not do a balance because it should be 0 if we don't do a balance. So let's try it out. We'll send. Okay, so down here, notice we got a 201 created. That's a good sign. So let's go back to this tab where we're making a GET request and send. And there he is, John Doe, his email, balance is 0 because we set that as the default. An ID, MongoDB will automatically give you what's called an object ID, and it's an underscore ID, that's the key. And then we have updated and created at because we use the Mongoose timestamp plugin. Okay, so we can now add customers. Let's add one more. This time let's do like, we'll say, I don't know, Kate Smith. Kate, and let's actually do a balance. So balance, I'll say 400. So let's try sending that. We get a 201. Let's go back here and send, and there we go. She has a balance of 400. All right, cool. So next route that I want to create is just to get a single customer. Okay, so I'm going to put that actually between the two right here. Let's say get single customer. All right, and I'm actually going to copy. I'm going to copy the get customers right here, this whole thing, because it's pretty similar. So it's going to be server.get/customers. Now we need to know which customer to get, so we want to do /:ID. We're going to get it by its ID. All right, and then as far as our query, we don't want to do just find. We want to do find by ID, which is a Mongoose method, and then we want to pass the ID. Now the way that we get this right here, just like with Express, is request.params, and then whatever that is, in this case it's ID. Okay, and then let's actually call this customer because it's a single customer, and then we'll return that customer. All right, now if that customer is not found, I'm actually going to change this error up. I'm going to change it to a resource not found error. Let's see right here, resource not found. And I'm actually going to put in a custom message here. I'm going to use backticks, and I'm going to say there is no customer with the ID of, and then I'm going to put in a template string here, and we'll say request.params.id. Okay, so we'll kind of customize the response a little bit. So let's save this and let's try it out. So I'm going to grab one of these IDs here, and I'm going to open up a new tab, and we'll make a get request to customers / and then that ID. Let's see what we get. And we get John Doe. All right, so if I change this, if I do customers /1 and I send, we get an error here, and you can see it has a code of resource not found, and then it has the message that we put in, and it'll say there's no customer with the ID of 1. So that's exactly what we want to happen. All right, so we can now get all customers, get a single customer, add a customer. Now let's work on update. Okay, so we want to be able to update customers. So let's go down here. We'll say update customer, and let's see, I'm going to copy the add customer. So I'm going to copy the server.post that we did and paste that in. All right, so there's a few things we need to change here. So we want this to be a put request, because when you update something, it should be HTTP put request. And then the endpoint is going to be customers /:ID, because we need to know which customer to update. We're going to keep this JSON check here. We're going to get rid of all this, though, because we're not creating a new customer, we're updating one. So we'll get rid of that. And in the try catch block, let's change this to just customer. And what we're going to do is take the actual model. So this should be uppercase C, because what we're doing is using this directly. We're using the model directly. And we're going to call customer dot, and then we're going to use a method, a Mongoose method called find, what is it? Find one and update, like that. Okay, so we want to find one record and we want to update it, and then this takes in a condition. So we want to find where the underscore ID is equal to the ID that's passed in the URL, and remember we can access that with request.params.id. Okay, and then the next parameter is actually going to be the data we want to update it with, which is going to be request.body. And the way that this works, this find one and update, even if we just send the name, like we just want to update the name, it'll keep the rest of the data intact and just update the name. Okay, and then the response we want to send is just a 200. And then for the error, if we were to put the wrong ID in here, this error will fire off. That's probably the most common thing that will happen. So what I'm going to do is copy this return next up here that we did where it says there's no customer with the ID. So I'm going to put that in the catch. Okay, and we'll save that. All right, so let's give this a shot. I'm going to go back to Postman and we're going to open up a new tab and make a put request. Okay. And let's do this right here. This is John Doe's ID. I want to update him. And in headers, we want to make sure we put a content type of application/JSON. Okay, then we'll go to body, raw, and then let's put in what we want to change, which is going to be his name. And I want to change it to John Williams. All right, so we'll go ahead and send. We get a 200 response back. So let's go back to our first tab where we look at all the customers, and I'm going to send, make that get request. And notice that now John Doe is now John Williams. So we can now update. So the last part of this CRUD functionality is the delete. So let's handle that last. Okay, so we'll go under update. Let's say delete customer, and all this code will be in the description if you want to check out the repository. So let's just type this out. We'll do server. Now instead of delete, we need to do del. This is how Restify works. Instead of delete, we do del. And then the endpoint is going to be customer. Have I been using customer? No, customers. So customers, and then we need the ID because we need to know which one to delete. Okay, we're going to say async request res next. Okay, and what we want to do here is our try catch. And if you don't like this method, if you don't like using a sync await with the try catch, you can just as well use the .then, .catch, or use the callbacks. Mongoose is pretty flexible in how you want to write the syntax. Okay, so let's create a variable here called customer, and let's set this to await. And we're going to call the customer model, and we're going to call a method called find one and remove. Okay, just like there's find one and update, there's find one and remove. And again, we have to pass in the condition, which is _ID. We want to match that to request.params.id, which is what comes in the URL. There's no request body, there's no data we need to send. We're just doing a delete. So next thing we're going to do is the response. So we'll send a 204, which means something was removed. Okay, and then of course we need next. And then as far as the error, I'm going to do the same thing I did here, which is, if they put in an ID that doesn't exist, we just want to return a resource not found error. And that's it. That's a delete. So let's save that. Let's go to Postman, open up a new tab, and let's say delete HTTP. Let's delete John Williams. So this is his ID. And that should do it. Let's go ahead and send. Okay, so we get a 204, no content. Let's go back to a get request to customers and send, and now John Williams is gone. Okay, so we made a successful delete request. If I were to try to delete something that's not there, we get our resource not found. All right, it'll do the same thing with the update. So we now have a full functioning CRUD RESTful API. All right, so there's no authentication or anything like that. We're going to be doing that in the next video. Okay, so the next video will be a little more complicated. We're going to deal with a couple different modules that we need to install. One is the Restify JWT extension, and then one is or not extension, but package, and then also JSON Web Tokens. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I will put the link to the repository in the description if you want to check it out. And that's it. I'll see you next time.